I finally arrived in Senchal. It is in chaos from the outbreak. I admit a moment of weakness. When I saw the victims today, I felt revulsion. I wanted to run. Mara preserve me. The sores, the bloody coughing, the rasping cries of pain. I nearly fled. But if men of wisdom like me run, how will we ever cure this plague? How will we ever prevent another? We cannot allow the Nahatan flu to be the victor. By the 8, I will help bring about its end. Little is revered by mortals above power and glory. Warriors fill the storybooks and the ears of the patrons at every tavern when the bards sing their songs. This appreciation isn't undeserved, yet there is a flaw in our perspective. We venerate courageous deeds, but these deeds usually manifest as displays of destruction. If a battle mage eviscerates an invading army with a blazing inferno, the spellcaster is rightfully considered a hero by his or her people. Even those who fell to the wizard's spell, they are remembered for facing overwhelming adversity, giving their lives to a cause far greater than themselves. But in the chaos we forget about the healers, who wrench broken mortals from the brink of their departure to the afterlife. On Tamriel, in the prestigious magical institutions, restoration is an afterthought, one which evokes a condescending scoff from elite sorcerers and intellectuals. Here in the Arcanium of the College of Winterhold, where I'm currently conducting my research in the various forms of magic in the Mundus, I was hard-pressed to find a teacher who would take my requests seriously. When I found the resident healer, Colette Morentz, her insecurity was palpable. Without so much as a good morning, she immediately asked me if I consider restoration to be a valid school of magic, one that is worthy of study. And well, the fact that you're watching this video is indicative of my answer to that. I managed to find some dusty tomes on restoration, and have since concluded that this school of magic is criminally underrated by the academics of Tamriel. Colette would argue that the school is valid because it can repel the undead and generate wards, not just heal cuts and bruises. But I'd go beyond her rather lackluster argument and make the case that the reasons for restoration's validity are far more profound than those. Hey guys, it's Drew here and welcome back to Fudge Muppet. Since delving into the schools of magic on Tamriel, the recurring trope has been that magic is far more destructive and dangerous than we may realise. And while it may seem repetitive, it's largely true. But sadly, this potential has been constantly overlooked. Well, I plan to change that. In this video, we're going to explore all there is to know about restoration, its documented history, and most importantly, why it's so much more than the arcane equivalent to a band-aid. You asked about my studies. My instructor says my empathy is strong, and that the outrage I feel at the suffering of others gives my restorative spells potency. I am humbled to have a gift for this noble calling. I only wish healing received more focus during apprenticeship. The emphasis on destruction seems so misplaced to me now. Margot Cantillon, the Breton healer who wrote those words, was one of the pioneers in the advancement of the Restoration School. The Restoration School was actually one of the slowest schools to develop, and while many fields were already stripped of their mystery and quite heavily regulated by the end of the First Era, restoration was still in a rudimentary state, well into the Second Era. In the book Feyfoken I, documenting the early days of the Mages Guild, we see the following excerpt. He had the Crimson Plague, which he was being treated for at considerable expense. You have to remember, these were the days before the School of Restoration had become quite so specialised. This tells us that even using restoration to cure disease was seldom seen as late as the 3rd century of the Second Era. This undoubtedly would have contributed to restoration not being as mainstream as the other schools, which were far more advanced by this time. Anyway, before we talk about the nuances of restoration, it's important to go over the basics. Restoration magic involves all spells related to healing, restoring, fortifying the body's attributes and abilities, warding, curing diseases and ailments, and protecting the target from malign forces. Restoration may also include spells and spell effects which absorb energy from targets. However, this is subject to debate, as many mages would firmly assert that this is a part of the mysticism school. Restoration also has the potential to deal damage in certain circumstances, despite how contradictory that may seem. This is done through the channeling of sun magic, but we will talk in much more detail about that soon. Due to the innately benevolent teachings and implementations of the school, restoration is considerably more popular among clerics and religious workers. Worshippers of the divines value restoration, especially followers of Stendarr, for he is the Aedra most commonly associated with the school. Aratanwi of Lilandril, a scholar and member of the sect of Harmonious Masters, a faction dedicated to Stendarr, had this to say about the divine's link to restoration. We of the sect of Harmonious Masters have dedicated ourselves to adapting the magic of Stendarr's light into spells of healing that can be employed by all the mortal races, not even excepting the beast peoples. The restorative virtues of our rituals and ceremonies are equally efficacious for every race. They can be cast by individuals of every blood, no matter how degraded, so long as they have the will and the wisdom to learn how to use them. As Stendarr, in his boundless mercy, has given all mortals the potential ability to employ his magical gifts, we of the Harmonious Masters feel honour bound to provide knowledge of these spells to all the peoples of Nirn freely and without hindrance. We can think of no higher cause than to improve the general welfare of all folk in every culture. Next to nothing is known of this charitable group, but we can say with certainty that this source was written prior to the 582nd year of the Second Era. As we discussed earlier, this was a period of time where restoration was still relatively unexplored, so it's likely that the Harmonious Masters played a part in developing the school. Stendarr is the god of mercy, charity, compassion, righteous rule, and merciful forbearance. He is also commonly credited for bestowing mortals with magic and the ability to use it. It's important to note that, while it's entirely possible Stendarr played a role in helping mortals to channel arcane energies, he did not create magic, which leaks into the Mundus through the rifts created by Magnus and the Magna Gi. Additionally, as we've talked about at length in this series, the schools of Magicka are merely arbitrary categories, so even though Stendarr is closely associated with restoration, there is no true distinction between restoration and the other schools. When followers of Stendarr refer to restoration as a gift from the divine, it is a metaphorical gift, not a literal one. In casting a restoration spell to heal the sickly or protect the weak, a mage is honouring Stendarr's sphere of altruism and mercy. Perhaps this can help us understand why restoration is so easily forgotten by powerful mages. The mighty have little need for protection and healing, usually their hubris will suffice. Conversely, by its very nature, restoration focuses on weakness. The same kind of attitude would explain why the Altmer disdain Stendarr and call him the apologist of men, as he reserves much of his benevolence for them. But what these Altmer fail to see is that Stendarr's affinity for men is in fact a compliment to the elves. Stendarr preaches that all people should be kind and generous to the people of Tamriel, protect the weak, heal the sick, and give to the needy. Therefore, when he neglects the elves to help the men, he is indirectly saying that elves are far superior in their pedigree and are less in need of his aid. The Harmonious Masters claim as much in their rituals. Some elves disdain to venerate the Atada Stendarr on the grounds that he is the apologist of men, and thus unworthy of worship by the children of Aldmeris. But if these narrow folk would open their souls to Stendarr's mercy, they would understand that Stendarr in his love cherishes and protects all mortals, even, perhaps particularly, those who are less fortunate in their heritage. Just as Stendarr promotes goodness between mortals, he also staunchly opposes those monstrosities who defy the sanctity of mortality. Thus Stendarr looked upon the world of mortals, and he found it afflicted by abominations, and he made it known unto his priests, resolutes and templars, that these unnatural profanities are abhorrent in his sight, and are to be exterminated by the righteous, without halt or mercy. For these abominations are each and every the eternal enemies of mortals and Mundus, and shall not be suffered to abide among us. And these abominations are four in kind, and may be known thusly. The Daedra, those unworldly horrors that are not of the Mundus, but come from oblivion to inflict cruelty and death upon the mortals of Tamriel. The man-beasts, those mortals who through traffic with the bestial Hircine do change their skins for those of animals, preying thence upon the innocent. The risen corpses, those restless undead whose rotting bodies persist with loathsome and unnatural vigour, sowing fear and agony among the living. The deathless vampires, who feed horrifically upon honest citizens, regarding righteous mortals as mere cattle to sate their unholy hungers. Know these four abominations, O ye righteous, and gather to slay them wherever they appear. This is where sun magic comes into play. Restoration is capable of performing miracles of rejuvenation, but it is also capable of bringing the blinding light of the heavens down upon the unworthy in a devastating blaze. You could make the case that sun magic is a close relative to fire magic from the Destruction School, concluding that sun magic should be classified in that school instead. After all, watching the undead wail as they're rapidly cremated hardly fits the nurturing theme of the Restoration School. But believe it or not, casting Sunfire, or Bane of the Undead, isn't actually that different to casting Close Wounds or Grand Healing. You see, just as all magical energy originates from the realm of the Aedra Aetherius, so too does the creation of Mundus and all living things within it. That's why the undead do not go to realms of Aetherius to experience their afterlife. They are a corruption of the energies that birth them in the mortal plane. So, if we break down what restoration is, well, it's the channeling of life energy from Aetherius in the form of magic. It taps into the forces of creation itself to restore a sick dying mortal to a pure, vigorous state. The lack of academic research dedicated to the Restoration School means this is just speculation, but it's hardly an illogical leap in reasoning. With this in mind, the same energy that heals a mortal would be a scourge to undead abominations. With the same logic, we could surmise that restoration, despite what the name may suggest, doesn't technically cure ailments and disease, but it instead replaces the wounds, sicknesses and corruptions of the target with new, unafflicted life energy from Aetherius, where all magic and all life emanates from. And now that we've discussed all of this, you can see why I believe that restoration is criminally underrated. It is written off as the arcane equivalent to a band-aid. Yet if academics would just spend some time and gold advancing research of the field, restoration could save countless lives. And it's astounding to me why more mages aren't chasing the secrets embroiled within the life energy of Aetherius. The potential is extraordinary. With the power of creation at your fingertips, a master of restoration could create life and banish any possibility of an untimely demise. But with another lesson covered and another rabbit hole of lore excavated, I'm gonna head into Winterhold's Frozen Hearth for some Colovian brandy by the fire. And when I wake up tomorrow, I'll harness the infinite potential of Tamriel's most underrated school to relieve my inevitable hangover. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Drew, and I'll see you next time.